Computer boot sequence initiated. Accessing library computer data. NCC 10535. Starship Tempest.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Story Missions. We're now entering the back half of Season 1, because of that, I think it's time that we take just a few minutes and introduce the experience point system that I want to use for this campaign. So Star Trek Adventures works a little differently from something like Dungeons & Dragons, because in D&D, you start out as a level 1, and then you fight level 1 goblins, and you level up, and then eventually you're level 50 fighting a level 50 dragon. It's pretty straightforward. But in Star Trek Adventures, your characters are already very competent and very experienced and highly trained in whatever they are, so that kind of linear system doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, the Star Trek Adventures system that does exist, even though it's very cool, is pretty involved. And honestly, when we record, we have just barely enough time to record the missions themselves, so we just don't have enough time to put in the time to the Star Trek Adventures version the way it should be done. So, in order to get around that, I kind of created my own house rule system, which is what we're going to be using, and I tried to keep it very straightforward, and we're going to go over it really quickly here, and then we will jump into the episode, the first episode of Tempest Tossed, and that will be started back up with Season 1 again. So, with me here is Ryan, and he's going to basically help me make sure I explain this right in a way that actually makes sense.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so the idea is that it's very straightforward. Every player character will automatically get 1 experience point for every mission the player is present for. So Ryan, for example, was present for all 10 missions of Season 1, so Maddox has 10 experience points to play with.
By the end of Season 1, I will have 10.
By the end of Season 1, correct.
Right.
The Tempest also gets a point which can be spent on supporting characters as well. So consider the Tempest has 10 points, and then those points can be spent on Eel or Doe or whoever else. In addition to those automatic points, characters can earn extra points in a few different ways, which, fair warning, is entirely up to my judgment and grace and allowance ahead of time. And I've already explained all of this to Ryan and all the other players, so they know. We've gone over this. We're just doing a little bit more streamlined of an explanation here for you guys, the audience. So every player character gets 1 point per mission that they're there for, and then extra points can be handed out depending on a couple of different criteria. So the first one of these is if a player character just flat out does something that is super, super difficult and or incredibly awesome. Like a difficulty 5 task level stuff, or if it's like a difficulty 7 that through various mechanics they actually manage to achieve. That sort of thing can earn a player character a point. A good example is Maddox in Entropy's Demise, the first mission, where he manages to make this deal, this peaceful resolution deal with the Romulan commander at the end of the mission, and that was really super hard, but Maddox rolled well enough to pull it off, so that qualifies as an extra point. The second one is if the player character makes some kind of really key contribution to the mission's success. And an example of this one is in the third mission, Border Dispute, where Dr. Teal, when Tara decided, no, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the autopsy of the Ellesmere captain.
Right.
That was really key to unlocking the rest of the mission, and you guys as players almost went by it. You guys, in the moment, were really close to just kind of leaving and moving on to the next thing, but Tara made a decision in that moment to go do that, and then that ended up unlocking everything else. So that is a point for her. And the third way is doing something above and beyond the Call of Duty in universe that really exemplifies the best of Starfleet ideals and principles. So what Starfleet is at its finest, if a player character really shines in that regard according to what Starfleet believes in and tries to do, then that can be an extra point. And the perfect example of this from a mission that we've released already is when Maddox risks his own life in Mission 4, Incident at Ivex, to make first contact with the Jello aliens, and like puts his own life on the line. Ryan as the player and Maddox as the character did not know what was going to happen, and were very willing or very open to the possibility that it might mean the death of the character. But Maddox and Ryan, as players, still took that risk and subsequently made contact and was able to find a peaceful resolution and save these aliens as a result. So
also, that totally threw you for a loop, because you had that whole mapped cave chase scene figured out in your head, and I threw a wrench in that.
Absolutely, and like that was incredible. That was the first point where, because we talked about like Incident Ivex was the first fully original mission that was entirely for me, and that was the first moment in any one of those missions where anybody did something that just really threw me for a loop that I didn't anticipate happening. But it was such an awesome moment as a thing for this character to do, and such a great example of what a Starfleet character on a show, like if Data did that or Tuvok did that or something, like you would go, holy crap, that's awesome. So that's that kind of example. I have a sheet worked out of the different points that I have pulled out, and then the players can, if there's a moment in any one of the missions or an episode where they think, I think this qualifies as one of those, then they can bring it to me and make a case, and I'll either say yes or no, and people will accumulate points that way. So, does that all make sense? Have I explained it decently well, Ryan?
I believe so. So just to clarify, we had this whole conversation right before we started gameplay on Mission 6, which you're about to listen to, the Tempest Tossed, Episode 1.
Correct.
And we decided it was about 15 minutes of back and forth and us sort of not really getting it, and it didn't really seem particularly interesting during the post-edit. So that's why we decided to come back and just kind of streamline it and hit the major points and just set up the framework a little bit more clearly. But this is a conversation that we did actually have on recording day.
Correct, yeah.
Right at the front end of the mission.
And part of the reason I wanted to do this, like re-record it, is because when I listened to that for the first time, I realized I didn't actually go into the part that ended up being the most important, and that two players actually ended up using in that mission itself, which we will cover here in a second. So, we went back and forth, and I sort of stumbled over how to explain it for 15 minutes, and then still forgot to explain the one thing that would actually be relevant for that day. So that's why we've come back and are doing it here.
I think for the audience, probably, Brian, the key thing to know going forward is we're back. Congratulations,
Hooray!
You made it through the mid-season break. But more importantly than that is where we all stand at the start of Mission 6 in terms of our experience points, each of the characters. So if we can just lay that out, people, if you have it in front of you.
Everybody has 5, the 5 automatic. Maddox has an extra 2, one for Entropy's Demise and one for Border Dispute, one for Entropy's Demise and one for Incident at Ivex, which I already described. And Tara as Dr. Teal has 2. One is the Border Dispute one that I described, and then the other is a similar moment on the Sabotage at Station 7 mission, which is where she essentially...
When she figured it out.
Divined the motives of the Saboteur and put those pieces together, and before anybody else did, and held to that point, to the point where you guys successfully resolved the episode as a result.
Right.
So Maddox and Teal currently have 7, and everybody else has 5.
And to be clear, she figured that moment out before any of the players, but not before many of the listeners, as we came to find out later, which is funny. So that point goes to you guys listening at home too, if you figured out the Incident at Ivex mystery before we did.
Well, in your guys' defense, a listener would have had several weeks to think about it. Well, you guys didn't necessarily have that. So
I suppose. The only other thing I'd say is, did we cover how you can use the points?
that's the next part that we're going to jump into now.
Okay. Off the deep end, Mr. Scott.
We've covered how you get points, where points come from. Now, what can you use the points for? The kind of boring, traditional, regular way, you can use them to change stats on a character. And I have a sheets worked out in terms of what actions cost what points, which I can publish if people want to see it, but honestly, it hasn't come up yet, so unless it does, I don't see the need to. But the other thing that I think is the much more interesting way to spend points, and which people have done already, and a couple of players do in this upcoming mission.
Yeah, people have done in the past of our past, but in your future.
The mission that you are about to listen to in the immediate future. Yes. The more interesting way to spend points, which players have already done at this point, and which you will hear in a few moments, is to develop an element or a relationship of something from a previous mission. So, for example, if the crew comes across some piece of alien technology and Holden, as the engineer, says, I want to reverse engineer that piece of technology so that we have our own version of it moving forward, that would be a use of points. It can also be done to develop some kind of relationship with an NPC from a previous mission. So, to use sabotage again as an example, you guys developed a relationship with that Starfleet intelligence agent and her boss, Commander Batinides. So you could say, I want to use a couple of those points to ask Commander Batinides for a favor to give us some piece of information or open some door for us or something like that. How much any particular action costs is just going to be a case-by-case basis. So the stranger or the more powerful the technology, or the bigger the favor, or the worse the relationship between the two of you, the NPC and the player character, the more they will cost. So anytime a player wants to use some points to do something like that, they'll basically just come to me and say, this is what I want to do, and then we'll work out how much it costs that we both think is fair. And so, yes, the first instance of this will come up in Tempest Tossed, which is the mission we're about to start. And I think it's actually a really cool use of it. It's a great way to start off, but I won't spoil it for anybody. That's the basic idea. Essentially, you can use them to develop elements from previous missions or otherwise kind of influence how elements continue on from a mission. The reason I wanted to set up a system like this is because, for two reasons, really. One is that most of the work behind it can be done outside of a session, right? So Ryan or Tara or Travis or whoever can be in the shower or driving in the car on the way to work and just kind of be thinking, oh, what if I use points to do this, to use that piece of technology moving forward in the future? And then they can have that thought at any point, any time of day, anywhere, and then bring that thought to me ahead of time, and then we can work it out and have it ready for the session. That way it kind of it makes the most valuable use of our very limited time and doesn't require spending half an hour, 45 minutes every session figuring out points and milestones and whatnot. So,
you know what's awesome? While you were, blathering on for however many minutes, I don't know, I tuned out for a while.
Yeah, no, I could tell.
While you were explaining that, I actually just thought of one.
Oh yeah?
So we'll have to talk offline in a minute.
Okay, that's awesome. I can't wait. So that's the first reason. The other reason that I like this system is because of a trope that exists in Star Trek that we know very well. I hope that this system will avoid that trope, and that trope is the Starship Enterprise or whoever the characters, they come across some incredible discovery or make some incredible invention that really, by all accounts, should massively change the fundamental nature of everything, like finding a Dyson sphere or a gateway that can transport you to the other side of the galaxy instantaneously, or
in any time period.
Yes, a time portal that can send you to any time. And then those things never really come up again. They don't have the outsized effect on the rest of the universe that you think they would. Part of my motivation in setting up a system like this is to try to avoid that that trope. So if you guys come across some crazy piece of technology or whatever, you can say, I want to spend points to bring that piece into the rest of the campaign in this way or that way. And ultimately take different threads like those and tie them together in different ways, and hopefully connect them in ways that like I can't even anticipate. As I put together missions, I'm going to try to sprinkle in different seeds, not really with any idea or intention of what they might turn into, and then you guys will say, oh, I want to spend some points to turn that seed into something or that seed into something. And my hope is that those will eventually create these threads that can then be tied together, that will tie different parts of the campaign together in ways that I couldn't, there's no way I could anticipate ahead of time.
It's cool because it helps the players sort of become, to some extent, you know, we help weave the tapestry of the campaign in a more direct way than if it was just left up to you.
And that's also part of it in the sense that, you know, a lot of RPG campaigns, especially like in the Dungeons and Dragons molds, are more serialized at a more basic level in the sense of, okay, your party starts here and the players decide they want to go north, south, east, or west, and the story unfolds piece by piece that way. What we're doing is trying to emulate Star Trek a little bit more in the sense that each mission is more or less a self-contained premise. Sometimes it's a planet of the week, or sometimes it's an alien of the week, or whatever. And there is going to be a larger campaign story that will stitch a lot of things together. But there's also a lot of like self-contained premises that would just be a standalone episode of Star Trek The Next Generation or whatever else. So the idea is, if there's an element from that standalone episode, like say the exocomps, right? Like from that one episode of TNG, it's like, well, the fact that you have this incredible new invention that is specifically an incredibly new invention should probably come up after the fact a little bit more.
Well, it did. They did eventually. The exocomps did make a return.
It did eventually. It took 25 years, but it did.
Thanks, Lower Decks.
So that's the idea. So like if something like the exocomps shows up, which is just these incredible artificially intelligent tools that's a part of a TNG episode. If something like that comes up in a mission of the Tempest, then a player can say, okay, I want to spend a few points to be able to use that element moving forward in the future somehow. And how you can use it and how many points it costs to use something will all depend on the element itself and all that sort of thing. So that's why it's a case-by-case basis. But that is the basic idea, and hopefully it will produce some interesting results.
I mean, not to sound definitive about it, but I think it already did.
Yes, and there's
in the future it will have. We will did it.
Yes, there's so a couple of people will spend points in this upcoming mission that you will hear at the end. There's at least one use later on in the season that I think is really cool, and apparently Ryan has a very cool one right now that will happen at some point, but you won't get to find out until down the road.
Season 2 at the earliest.
So. Yeah, that's the basic system. Is there anything that I skipped or didn't put together in a clear way, Ryan?
No, I think so. I think you covered it for the most part.
Okay. If you have any questions, be sure to feel free to send us an email at starshiptempest@gmail.com or on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Starship Tempest. Throw us a question, and I will answer it to the best of my ability. But otherwise, that's basically it. And now I think we're ready to throw you back into the campaign.
Now, the only other thing I'd like to add is at the conclusion of Tempest Tossed, after the mission ends, there will be another supplemental episode, sort of like this one here, where it will be the epilogue. So this, we're considering the prologue of the mission, and in the epilogue, you'll find out how and when the characters spend their experience points. So just make sure that you listen to the mission, and then you also go back and listen to the epilogue at its conclusion. That way you'll be fully caught up with where we're at. I think that's it.
All right. We'll see you out there.
All right. We'll see you out there in just a minute. Go team.